Most boat owners believe that if they maintain their outboard, change the oil, flush it after saltwater use, and avoid abuse, the engine should last at least 2,000 hours. That assumption isn't unreasonable. Modern outboards use forged crankshafts, pressure lubrication, electronic fuel injection, stainless valves, and computer-controlled ignition systems. On paper, they should rival car engines for longevity. But after speaking with 20 full-time marine mechanics across Florida, Texas, California, the Great Lakes, and the Pacific Northwest, I kept hearing a phrase that was difficult to ignore. Some engines wear out by design. Not because they were mistreated, not because owners were careless, but because of small engineering decisions that only reveal themselves after years of heat, corrosion, and constant load. What follows are the 13 outboards these mechanics said they see most often on rebuild stands before reaching 2,000 hours. And the one at number 1 shocked me. In the marine world, 2,000 hours is not extreme mileage. For a recreational boater, it represents 10 to 12 seasons on the water. For charter captains or commercial fishermen, it's often only 3 to 5 years of steady use. Industrial engines operating under similar loads regularly exceed 8,000 or even 10,000 hours. So, when an outboard requires a full rebuild at 1,200 or 1,500 hours, mechanics don't describe it as old. They describe it as premature. One mechanic from Tampa told me something that stayed with me. You don't learn which engines are weak from brochures. You learn it by lifting cylinder heads. The Mercury Optimax 135 and 150 models from the late 2000s came up early in the conversations. Mechanics described them as strong performers with excellent throttle response, but also as engines that push extremely tight tolerances in their direct injection systems. Air compressor bearings wear, injectors clog from ethanol residue, and when they run lean, piston scoring isn't far behind. Many of these engines still run well past 1,000 hours, but rebuilds between 1,400 and 1,700 hours are common enough that shops consider it normal. Several mechanics then mention the early Suzuki DF140 four-strokes, particularly those built in the mid-2000s. They described gradual valve train wear, timing chains that stretch earlier than expected, and thermostats that stick just long enough to cause subtle overheating. Later, Suzuki designs improved dramatically, but those first generations left an impression. The Mercury 115 four-stroke, built between 2014 and 2018, came up in a different way. These engines often continue running past 1,500 hours, but mechanics described a steady accumulation of expensive problems. Fuel rail pressure sensors that fail, throttle bodies that corrode internally, and cooling systems that clog slowly over time. Owners don't always lose the engine outright, but repair bills sometimes exceed the motor's resale value. When the discussion turned to two-strokes, the early Evinrude E-Tech 150 and 175 models were mentioned often. Mechanics praised their torque and efficiency, but also described injector coil failures, oil pump faults, and crankshaft bearing fatigue. They noted that direct injection brought impressive performance, but also introduced complexity that shortened real-world lifespan for many owners. Even Yamaha was not immune. Mechanics pointed to the HP Di200 and 225 two-stroke engines as examples of powerful designs that suffered from high-pressure fuel pump failures and injectors that gradually lost proper spray patterns. When that happens, detonation follows, and pistons rarely survive for long. They describe these engines as thrilling to drive, but fragile under sustained commercial use. The Tohatsu TLD 90 and 115 models appeared next, particularly among coastal repair shops. Mechanics talked about ignition modules that deteriorate from heat, wiring harnesses that corrode internally, and thermostats that scale over in saltwater environments. None of these issues alone is catastrophic, but together they shorten engine life significantly. Honda's BF-150 four-stroke from the late 2000s surprised many people. Mechanics generally admire Honda engineering, but these engines were criticized from exhaust manifold corrosion and water jacket scaling that restricts cooling over time. Valve seat erosion also appeared earlier than expected, particularly in engines that lived in saltwater year-round. The first-generation Mercury Varidu 200 earned a reputation as a technological leap forward, but also as an experiment in the real world. Mechanics described supercharger clutch failures, ECU moisture intrusion, and gear case bearings that overheated under sustained load. Later Varidus solved many of these problems, but the earliest examples often struggled to reach high hour counts. Suzuki's DF250 from the early 2010s was described as smooth and powerful, but internally stressed. Mechanics mentioned timing chain stretch, oil dilution during cold operation, and vibration fatigue in the midsection. These engines produce impressive horsepower, but they work hard to do it. The Nissan 70 and 90 models, which were based on older Tohatsu designs, came up repeatedly as engines that owners often abandon rather than repair. Lower unit bearing failures, poor anoid placement, and wiring corrosion make them expensive to restore once major problems appear. Late-model Johnson 150 Ocean Runners were remembered with a mix of nostalgia and frustration. Mechanics described weak piston ring lands, uneven cylinder cooling, and oil injection failures. Many loved the sound and character of these engines, but few expected them to survive past 1,600 hours. Almost every mechanic laughed when the Evinrude Ficht Ram 150 was mentioned. They described injector overheating, detonation caused by unstable fuel mapping, and frequent ECU failures. Several said these engines rarely make it past 1,200 hours before requiring major internal work. And then came the engine no one expected to hear. Number 1. The shocker. The Yamaha F225 four-stroke, built between 2004 and 2006, was mentioned quietly at first, then repeatedly. Not because it was neglected, not because owners abused it, but because of a design flaw hidden deep inside the engine. Mechanics explain that the exhaust housing in these engines was cast in a way that traps salt water internally. Drainage is poor, and corrosion begins where owners cannot see it. Over time, that corrosion eats through the housing. Once perforated, water enters the exhaust stream and can flow backward into the cylinders. Hydrolock follows, connecting rods bend, pistons crack. The engine often looks perfect from the outside. Compression tests pass, oil samples look clean, no warning codes appear. Then, one day, it simply fails. Some mechanics reported seeing failures at 900 hours. Many more between 1,200 and 1,800 hours. Very few past 2,000. Yamaha eventually redesigned the component, but thousands of the original engines remain in service today, quietly aging. When I asked why some engines survive 3,000 hours while others fail early, the answers were surprisingly consistent. Reliable outboards tend to be understressed, conservatively tuned, built with thick castings, designed with simple cooling paths, equipped with straightforward fuel systems. The engines that fail early are often the ones that chased innovation, weight reduction, or peak horsepower. Progress sometimes comes at a cost. A dependable outboard is rarely exciting. It doesn't break records. It doesn't dominate advertisements. It doesn't impress at the dock. It simply starts every time. And in the marine world, that is worth more than horsepower. If you own one of these engines, I'm curious, how many hours are on it? Has it been reliable or expensive? Leave it in the comments. Because the most honest reliability data doesn't come from manufacturers. It comes from people who pay the repair bills.